identity of a Jewish woman called Mary Magdalene. It's been the subject of debate for 20 centuries. But her biography is only 20 words long.
Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and many others, provided for them out of their resources.
In the other Gospels, she appears only at the crucifixion, at the tomb on Easter morning. But in Luke's Gospel, she is mentioned along with some other women in chapter 8, which is pretty early in the Gospel.
These few words in Luke are the sum total of our background information on Mary.
Because we know so little, there's so much desire to squeeze, if you can, everything we can out of the bits of information we have.
This is what we do know about Mary. The Gospel writers always refer to Mary as Maria Magdelene. 5th century Jewish leaders thought this meant she was a hairdresser.
The rabbis of the Talmud mention Mary Magdalene, but actually in a very strange way. They understand her to be Miriam Megadla Sa'ara, which literally means the one who builds up the hair, and it means a hairdresser.
But there is a simpler explanation.
We think that this is a place name, that she was from a town called Magdala, which is located on the Sea of Galilee.
During the 1st century, Magdala was a fishing village on the Sea of Galilee's western shore.
Magdala is a small fishing village, a town maybe of 1,000 people. It literally means dry fishville. It's where you go to dry fish. It's where fishermen work. It's not an elegant, nice place to come from.
It was just 2 hours' walk from Capernaum, where the Gospels say Jesus based his ministry. It's likely this is where Mary first heard Jesus speak. But the very fact that the Gospels name Mary after her town, just as they wrote Jesus of Nazareth, gives us a clue to who Mary was.
It would be extremely uncommon to refer to a married woman by her place. The more usual thing is to refer to her by the man that she's attached to, usually a husband, a father, a brother. So this indication of calling her Mary of Magdala is for me the strongest indication that she was not married.
Since her village identified Mary, she most likely had neither husband nor children. But the real puzzle about Mary is why she was following Jesus in the first place. Jewish society in the 1st century forced a sharp division between men and women. The division began at the temple in Jerusalem. Women could not enter the court of the priests where the sacrifices took place. Instead, they had to stay in the court of the women.
There isn't any question that from a ritual point of view, Judaism in the period we're talking about had different roles for men and women. And the woman's basic rule was in the home, and the man in the public sphere.
If the Gospel of Luke describes Jesus' band of missionaries accurately, the preacher from Nazareth broke those rules.
Mary, called Magdalene, and Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward, and Susanna, who provided for them out of their resources.
It seems very clear to me that there were women that were in the inner circle of Jesus, women that are independent of their families and so on.
And the Gospel implies that these women were wealthy enough to support Jesus and his penniless missionaries.
Mary Magdalene is described as a woman with a certain number of possessions and a woman of substance, as it were.
Perhaps she had an inheritance, but I don't think we should think of enormous wealth. I think we should think of something much more modest.
Her apparent means, her name with no connection to a man, and her freedom to travel around Galilee start to build a picture of the real Mary Magdalene.
My assumption is that she's a widow. Usually when you have, in this culture, women moving somewhat independently and with a certain amount of goods, it's usually a widow.
The remaining 7 words of her biography provide a faint glimpse of how Mary met Jesus.
From whom 7 demons had gone out.
Jesus had forged a reputation as a healer in the villages of Galilee. But in a world where people believed disease came from sin or from demonic possession, healing was nothing we would recognize as medicine.
In the world of Jesus, there is rather a fine line between performing an exorcism and performing a healing. A disease over against being filled with a demonic kind of force is a very subtle kind of difference as well.
In the 6th century, Pope Gregory linked Mary's 7 demons to the 7 deadly sins.
This provided fuel later on for an idea that she was a prostitute. A woman who is possessed, of course, is immediately associated with sexual irregularity.
In the 1st century, possession was simply a sign of sickness.
We would probably think about an individual who had some psychological problems, a neurosis, maybe somebody who was depressed, somebody who didn't feel as if he or she was whole.
Jesus probably called on the name of God and demanded that the demons leave Mary, as he did in other exorcisms in the New Testament.
The patient has to believe that something is going to happen. And if there is not that kind of belief and trust, then nothing is going to happen.
This moment may have been the beginning of a deep bond of trust between Jesus and Mary.
There's a tendency to want to think, well, what does it have to do about Jesus and Mary's relationship? Because it would make sense that if he had healed her, that she would then become a very devoted kind of follower as a result of that.
The Bible tells us nothing more about their relationship, but other writers would. And their stories would rock the very foundation of Christianity.